This episode is sponsored by Aurora Coaching. Hello, my name is Crystal Petrie, and you are watching another episode of the Crystal Petrie Podcast, Season 3. She's the one everyone calls when the crisis hits. She holds it all together at work, at home, and in her community. But what happens when the woman who never breaks finally breaks? Today, we're pulling back the mask of strength to talk about burnout, the silent epidemic among high-functioning women who've been taught that rest is a luxury, not a right. This episode is about reclaiming that right. And Tracy Doyle is here to educate us on how to reclaim our right to rest. Welcome to the podcast, Tracy.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm so honored to be here today.
I am so glad that you are here today, Tracy, because high functioning, and when we say high functioning, we're talking, you could be the CEO of a company, but you can also be the stay-at-home mom that's doing everything at the house. Mm-hmm. So it's not, based on title, but, as women, we feel like we have to do it all. So I'm glad that you're here to educate us on you don't have to do it all. You can get your rest. You can get your relaxation. I'm ready to jump into this podcast now. But before we get to that, Tracy, where in the world are you?
Yeah, so I'm actually live here in New Jersey. I live in Warren, New Jersey, which is in the middle part of the state.
Excellent. Okay, so let's get into this conversation. I've been waiting to speak with you about this for so long. Okay, how do you personally define burnout, and how is that different from a simple I'm tired or I'm overworked?
That's a great question. And the first thing I want to say is every woman I know is a CEO. Okay. Because we could be the chief executive officer of our house, of our kids, of our, of our family, at our job, in terms of, it doesn't matter what the title is, we're always in charge, right?
Yes.
And so, so the way burnout shows up at first, and I think there's some myths that we have to bust with burnout, right? Mm-hmm. Because, people just say, oh, I'm burned out, right? But true emotional burnout, what it starts to look like is it starts out feeling like pressure. Right. So we got this, we got that, and we're just going and we're doing and we're going and we're doing. We have to manage the kids. We have to manage our husbands. We have to manage the house. We have 16 responsibilities at work. We have to manage our boss sometimes. Right. But then what it starts to look like is we start to feel stressed, that overwhelm. Right. I can't breathe. Right. I just got so much going on. But where does it go from there? And that's what we want to pay attention to today. Where it goes to from there, oftentimes is I can't handle it, right? So I start getting overwhelmed and I can't handle it. And the next thing I know, inside, I start to think, doesn't anyone see what I do? Then I start to feel unseen. And then we feel not only unseen, we feel unheard. And then it starts to feel like what I call fine. So if I want anyone to remember burnout, I want to remember I'm fine, because
oh my goodness, that's like the key word so many women say.
Let's break it down. Where do we go? We start having frustration. We're frustrated with the kids. We're snapping, and we're frustrated with our spouses. Then we get frustrated with team members. Then we're really frustrated with our job, and then we're frustrated with the people on the PTO. It doesn't matter where we are. We are just frustrated. But importantly, what's really happening inside beyond that frustration is we're irritated. Everyone is just getting on our nerves. And when will they stop asking me? When will they stop wanting something from me? When will they get everything that I do? We are so irritated, right? And it starts to really build up like a cauldron. I call it magma. You think about a volcano that ruptures. But where it goes after we get to that place is numb. And then we're human doing. We don't know how to be anymore. We're human doing, right? We do and we do and we do and we do. And what are we doing? We're stewing and we're stewing and we're stewing, and we're angry. We get really, really angry, and we're just going through the motions, numb, angry, and frustrated. And then where do we go from there? Complete and utter exhaustion. And what that exhaustion feels like is bankruptcy, like just emotional and spiritual emptiness and bankruptcy. For myself, when I was burned, I went through a pretty intense burnout episode, and it lasted for me. It not lasted, it built for years. And then it lasted after I started working on it. It took a long time for me to manage it, which is why I did write a book about this. But the thing is that when we get to that empty and bankruptcy place, when you look at the data on burnout, what starts to happen for many of us is we're having conflicts at work, conflicts at home, relationship struggles. We feel so empty and alone. Then where does it go from there? Some of us get depressed and we need help. And some of us turn to substances, right? And we move on to, I can't handle the pressure. I've seen some women, they use alcohol. I did, right? I mean, I tried to relieve the pressure. I didn't know what to do with it. And for some, they move into taking their lives, right? So burnout has a devastating toll when it's left untreated, if you will. But with that treatment, ironically, is all within us. And it's the things that we have to do. And that's really where I'd really like to help women understand that overcoming emotional burnout is an inside job.
Why is it, Tracy, that so many high functioning women, and again, when we say high functioning, we are talking about everything from the mom that works, the stay-at-home mom, to the CEO, like across the board. Why is it that they are particularly vulnerable to burnout?
And that's another great question. And I think it's more and more men and women, so I don't want to make it gender specific. For me personally, I speak to women because I have experience, and I have experience being a lived everyday professional woman trying to manage it all. But so the idea here is that burnout basically starts from within. And why do we struggle? Because we're all wounded, right? We've all had experiences in our lives that we internalize. Now, for some, these experiences could be being rejected at school. For others, it could be strict parents, right, who just were very, not strict, but critical, right? And how we internalize that. For others, in my case, I had some pretty significant trauma in my life. It was trauma, and I had family complexities because I was raised by a mentally ill mother, and I had to assume the responsibility of becoming a parent at the age of 10, right?
Wow.
But irrespective, we all internalize our life experiences, and what it does is it shapes beliefs, initial beliefs, I call them, right? Everyone will have their own initial beliefs. So let me give an example. So my experience, this one's one of my favorites because it really wreaked havoc for me at work. Basically, in my experience, I was raised by a mentally ill mom, right? So how did I internalize coming home from school and having a mom who was, let's say, emotionally unavailable, or who was neglectful? Okay, and if you read my book, you'll read my story is pretty intense.
And what's the name of your book, Tracy?
It's called Life Storms: Finding Your Clear Sky.
Okay.
So, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute. But so, all right, here I am. So, young kid, 7 years old, 8 years old, really happy to tell mom about school. Mom's not available. Okay. So what do I internalize? Very first time that happens. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. And it continues to get reinforced. And as it got reinforced, I was, I was exposed to some pretty devastating effects of addiction, and having a drug addicted and alcoholic stepfather, right? And that is a whole nother story. But the belief was reinforced. Nobody cares. And where did I go? Well, where I went with that was to the limiting belief, which is, I'm not worthy of anyone caring about me, right? And then where does it go there? Where does it go next? It starts going into what I call the reaction cascade. We then have a fear, and in my case, especially when it came to nobody cares, I was afraid I'd lose something. So I had to overachieve and do more, right? Make sure that it would work. But then what happens? What happens next are other thoughts, other limiting beliefs that hold us back. And I can go into great detail about that. But what ultimately happens is what we're projecting to the outside world, which is, in my case, I became very self-reliant, right? That's where nobody cares took me. So how did it wreak havoc at work? How did it wreak havoc in my life? Well, I look like the overcommitted, stressed out CEO, the overcommitted, stressed out sister, the overcommitted, stressed out daughter. I was constantly on edge. And because I wasn't managing my burnout and I didn't recognize that it was coming from within me,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted everyone else to change. I wanted people at work to stop needing me and asking me questions, right? And because what would I do when they'd say they needed help? Oh, fine, I'll do it myself, right? You don't understand what I'm directing you to do. Well, I didn't take the time, right, to give direction as one example at work. So what I've learned in my own journey is that these internalized beliefs that we shape from our early life experiences are often living in our unconscious mind. So that's why so many of us are struggling. We're unaware. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. Tracy, how does society's definition of strong, successful, like all of these like buzzwords contribute to burnout?
You know, I think for many of us we're strong women, right? And I don't want to say there's weak women. I think every woman I know is strong because we are the CEO of our lives. We are. And and so what I find is that with that strength that we exude, for many women being a single mom and having to manage it all, home and work, kids, etc. Being the mom with 4 kids who has to manage 4 children and be
Yes.
there for her husband and show up at work, right? It doesn't matter, right? What I find is that we are afraid to admit that we need help, you know? And the fear that we have is if they think we need help, we're perceived as weak and that we can't handle it. Hence, fine, right?
Right.
And so we're fine. We got it. I could do this. And we keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And men do too. But for us, we push and push and push and to that point where it's like, how much more do they want from me? And doesn't anyone see my struggle? And the truth is, they don't. They don't see it. It's up to us to voice it.
Mhm. And do you think that if women voice it, will people hear it? Will they receive it? If you say that, you're not fine, like I'm tired, and all of these, will people receive that? Will they hear it?
Well, that's a great question because one of the things I've had to personally learn was how to communicate these things. You know, it's for me, it was like, don't you see how much I do? Like, no, I'm too tired, that was too edgy, right? So one of the things I talk about in my book is something called acknowledgement. I was privileged to actually hear Oprah Winfrey speak live in Newark, New Jersey, many years ago. And she said, the greatest gift that you can bring to any room is acknowledgement. And so, for example, when someone's asking something of me today, now that I know the difference, because I've been working on this for a long time. It's acknowledging, I really appreciate you needing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Or I could see that you have a lot on your plate and you're asking me to help you do this and you're struggling with making this decision. I don't have the capacity right now, right? Because for us, at least in my own experience, it's this sense of urgency that we have to be there right now, right? When we have to do it right now. And the truth is, when we hear about boundaries and setting boundaries, boundaries doesn't mean we're walling off and cutting off. It's just knowing when we can be available to do something. In some cases, I wish I could help. Unfortunately, I'm not available. Now at work, yeah, that's harder, right? But at work, it's a conversation that sounds like this. And I'll be honest with you, I was taught this by the people who reported to me. Okay. I worked with such amazing people. And I remember there was a woman I worked with, and there was a lot on her plate. And what she said is I have too many priorities. You're asking a lot of me. And there's just too many priorities. Which one is the first one?
Oh, wow.
You know what?
Yes.
I was blown away by that. And I said to myself, I need to learn how to do that. As I
Yes.
struggled with my own sense of urgency and thinking everything was priority, and I didn't know how to sort through what was first and what was next. And I created it into I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do that. That's how I do it today. And managing all the things that I do without freaking out and melting down. But because when I was burnt out, I just couldn't handle it. But what I've learned is what's first, what's next. and then what's next, and then what's next. And so learning how to communicate that too was critically important in the workplace. And for me as a leader, it was learning how to really help someone delegate that for themselves as well. And I'll admit, as a new manager, I wasn't good at doing that, right? But as women in business, we have to get really good at also supporting other women and helping them prioritize. Because when we don't, we all come at it with that, oh my God, I'm needed. Oh my gosh, I have to get this done or I'm going to let you down. Because we're people pleasers, right? Right. So you have to think about all those things and how can we support each other? And that's one of the things I had to learn.
When life feels like a storm, you don't have to weather it alone. From Tracy Doyle, Life Storms, Finding Your Clear Sky, the book that introduces the Aurora Method. 8 powerful practices designed to help professionals overcome emotional burnout and rediscover connection. Ready to take it deeper? Join the Aurora Method Academy, an 8-week program with step by step coaching to help you apply these tools to your everyday life. Tracy, you are an author, you're also a coach in this industry. How long have you been in this field and how did you get here?
Well, the journey to getting here was an ugly journey. So, there was a time when, I felt like a human doer, right? As I was
Mhm.
saying before. And I did everything for everyone to the point of exhaustion. And while I never said no, inside my head, I'm screaming, like, don't you see what I do? I'm walking around, I'm stewing, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. And, I got to a point where, I think most of us do, which is we have the tendency to think if we keep pushing and we keep doing more, then people will see our struggle, right?
Mhm.
And they'll stop asking and they'll stop wanting more. But what happens when they don't? And
They
this is
keep asking and they keep wanting more.
That's right. But what happens when they don't see it? So this is my journey with that. So I was a doer, did everything for everyone. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. I had had enough. It was December 21st. It was 1999. It was a cold winter's day. And as I was getting ready for work and I was catching myself, looking at myself in the mirror, this is what I saw. A woman who was hollow, spirit dim, just like lights were out. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. And inside my head, I'm saying, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done taking care of my mentally ill mom. I'm done being responsible for my sister's kids. I am done being pulled in every single direction at work. I'm done being everyone's fixer. And I just shouted in my mind, I am done doing, or I'm sorry, fighting everything and everyone. I'm done. And then my mind just kept going to, if I got good and drunk, I would get in a crash.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that thought was deep. And then I said, yeah, if I got into a crash, no one would know that I planned this. No one would know that I want to die and I can't do it anymore because I didn't want to look weak, right? I couldn't even ask for help. And, I went through with that. And the next thing I knew was someone was knocking on my car window. And next thing I heard was, are you okay? Are you okay? And
Wow.
that voice jolted me. And I realized I went through with it. I was a hair away from a head-on collision. And that cry afterwards was a cry to the universe because I got out of the car and I couldn't believe what I had done. And that next morning I was walking to a school meeting for my niece and going to a 3rd grade school meeting. And I was having a fight in my head, like, Tracy, you just almost killed 2
Yes,
and
that's what I'm
yourself,
thinking.
right? But my heart is arguing, but you lived, but you lived. Tracy, how could you? You're horrible, and then I kept hearing my heart saying, but you lived. And then I realized I want to live. Like everyone was counting on me, and I want my life back. And I yelled out to the universe, I want to live. I want to live again, and help me. And so, I had to come to terms with this stuff, and I realized the devastating toll of burnout. And so I went on a 2-year journey. And, that 2-year journey was really a journey because that cry began that journey. And as I went on this 2-year journey, I learned so much. I just, obviously I got help for depression, and I went to therapy. I'd been to therapy before for, basically for, the trauma that I had experienced. But when it comes to burnout, right, like these conflicts, these feelings, they keep coming back. And so even though I did those things, this is why it was a 2-year journey, it wasn't enough. I still kept feeling alone and isolated. And therapy to me is great. And I'm not saying it's not, because I've been to it for many years. Mm-hmm. But it works in isolation, and we worked on different things. And I had one friend who had found her way back to herself. She lost herself too. And she showed me a tool. And this was the tool that helped me understand that our life experiences shape our thinking. And that's what she would always say to me, Tracy, all of this is coming from within you. And then that reminded me of a time when I was having a talk with my boss. And I was like, I can't handle it anymore. You're asking too much of me. And he kept saying, you're the overachiever. All of this is within you. And I'm like, read between the lines, look at my 3 fingers. Are you kidding me? Right? But no, he was right. And she was the one who reminded me that it's all within you. And she showed me a tool. And it was a very painful tool. I had to look at, across my life, I had to look at who was I angry with, who hurt me. And then she had conversations with me to help me recognize where in my life I got locked drum tight in my beliefs. And I was operating from these unconscious beliefs that were driving everything. They drove my thoughts. They drove my feelings. They drove how I showed up in every relationship. And then she showed me how to undo what I did. So in other words, reshape what was shaped. And and my friend's name is Candace. And Candace she was super spiritual. And she read books, and she ran book clubs, and she did all the self-help stuff. And she just showed me, and we would talk daily. And she challenged me to think about things in another way. In my book, I call it the turnaround. I actually created tools based on my conversations. Mm-hmm. But what I saw in front of me was, they call it self-centered thinking, right? And you hear people say, oh, you're so selfish, or you're a narcissist. I call to everyone, stop with the labels, right? Because I'm book smart. Because I was like, how dare you call me self-centered? I do everything for everyone. I was fighting with her. But what she said was, self-centeredness or selfishness, however you want to define it, it's being absorbed with something within yourself. What is that? Find it. So I'm book smart. So what do? I start looking up all the self-centered things. Like what are self-centered thoughts? What are self-centered behaviors? What are self-centered feelings? What I discovered for myself was self-pity, right? Oh. I discovered self-pity. I felt sorry for myself. But as a person who, experienced trauma, I discovered something called self-effacing, right? So what does self-effacing mean? It means when you're traumatized, and this again doesn't mean severe trauma like I had. Mm-hmm. I've met women who've just had their parents criticize them and shut their voices down. Self-effacing means to be invisible, to be afraid to speak up, to not rock the boat, and to just keep doing, right? I learned that. And then what did I learn? I learned self-reliance. I was like, based on these early beliefs, like, here I am. I think I have to do it all almost to my death, right? So there's so many more. But what I learned was I call them, in my book, I call them the issues. When mm-hmm. we know what the issues are, and we know how the issues drive our behavior, we can change it. Why? Because we can manifest something else. We can use affirmations, our own personal affirmations. And essentially, because we know what we're affirming. How many of us have tried affirmations that are created by other people, and they become like Teflon, they roll, right? Mm-hmm. And then they're on your window or they're on your mirror. You don't use them anymore. I hung them always on my cork board, and I'd stop using them. But when you know your own, and you know the belief, you can reshape it. And like, so for me, if I'm going through I don't belong, oh no, girl, I'm like, you belong and you're loved, right? And then when that old belief takes me to something like, of being afraid that I'm going to be, rejected, or I'm less than someone else. Oh no, girl, you are enough, right? And and I mean, and I'm able to really have an inner dialogue with myself and empower myself. And that's was the journey, and that's where that journey took me. My friend taught me that. But the other thing she taught me was, oftentimes for those of us with burnout, we wall ourselves off from everyone because we think that, like, they're the ones who don't want us, or we think in the spirit of boundary, we have to cut them off because it's not healthy. But what happens? We feel unfulfilled. We feel alone. So part of what I learned as I started to learn how to reaffirm was, there's a book, it's called 52 Esteemable Acts. And it's all about, when we do esteemable things for others, we in turn build our own esteem. When we, when we mend relationships, we of course feel fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
So using the idea that I learned from Oprah about acknowledgement, I realized I had the ability, as I was sort of, manifesting change within myself, I realized I had to acknowledge some of the things that I did in the spirit of burnout, and how I pulled away from my spouse, how I was putting all this pressure on others, how I was to the point of meltdowns. I mean, it was bad. I mean, I would just freak out at work. I was having meltdowns at work, and I had to really manage, how do I change that? I had to acknowledge things. And as I worked through those changes, I was building my own esteem. I was building my, sort of my own security, right? And confidence. And I was able to lead with clarity, not just at work, but at home, with my family, with my friends, with all those people in my life that matter.
First of all, thank you so much, Tracy, for being so vulnerable on the podcast and sharing your story with me and my community. Thank you so much. How do you think burnout affects a woman's self-esteem and the way she thinks about herself?
Yeah, and that's another great question, because when you go back to those old wounds
Mm-hmm.
and those old internalized beliefs, what you'll find is, oftentimes those wounds affect our core basic needs. So the tool that I have in the book is called the self-assessment. And just by way of background, I forgot to say, so I'm degreed in psychology and counseling, and I wanted to really be a clinical psychologist, and I wanted to help others. But I came from poverty, so I put myself through school. I couldn't afford to go on and get my advanced degree. And I
Mm-hmm.
shifted my career into the pharmaceutical industry. And excuse me, and when my friend showed me this tool that she had, and it's a self-assessment tool, what I saw, I learned Abraham Maslow. When Abraham Maslow says, at any point in your life that your needs are stunted, so your needs are based on your esteem, based on
Mm-hmm.
your security, based on your ambitions, your sense of belonging. Anytime they're stunted, you're held back, and your beliefs
Right.
and your feelings hold you back. So this tool helps you identify that, and then you will learn how to manifest change in yourself when you do, which is what they tell you in theory what to do. My problem is I didn't know how. So these tools and my conversations with my friends, and well, my one main friend, but my
Mm-hmm.
other friends really started helping me recognize, and the various self-help books that I read, how to really work on my own esteem. So the reason I would say women have low self-esteem is based on their life experiences. That's it. And it's up to us. Only we can change that. Only we can build our esteem. Only we can build our confidence. Only we can overcome burnout and reclaim our lives.
Let's talk about healing and recovery from burnout. What does that look like realistically when someone is healed and recovered from burnout?
Yeah. So what recovered feels like
Mm-hmm.
is feeling centered and calm on the inside, right? But for me, working through some of these old beliefs and the narratives in my mind is a daily practice. So to begin the healing journey, it's recognizing and uncovering, just like an archaeologist does a dig.
Right.
We have to go through pain first, right? I think it was Wayne Dyer who basically said, you have to face the pains of your life in order to overcome and find your freedom. So you have to first start there. It's an exercise that, most people I work with, it'll take a week to go through if they're committed to doing it. Some people don't want to do it. Like they don't give themselves permission to do it because it feels too painful. And if that's the case, I encourage that they go to therapy. But it starts there. And then what you do is there's some turnaround exercises. Then you start practicing the manifestations of change. So typically in 8 weeks, you start to see results, right? And what recovered feels like is I'm handling things differently. I'm communicating better. I feel fulfilled. But most importantly, I feel connected to myself again. I've restored connection to me. But more importantly, I've restored connection to you and to others in my life. And I'm navigating life. Not that I'm not going to have storms. So the reason I named the book Life Storms, everyone thinks it's about all the big, life problems.
Yeah.
No, we have daily churn on the inside. That stuff, it just gets triggered in our minds quick. Think about it. You're at work, all of a sudden someone says something or they do something and you're frustrated and irritated and, right? It's something was triggered there. That's an unconscious belief. That's all it was. And it's probably a fear that was triggered. But we want to say they, right? They did this to me. No, they didn't, right? This is yours, right? And so what recovery looks like and recovered feels like, recovered is I recognize when I'm triggered, right? And then I have a choice. In some cases, if I'm not, me personally, when I am not managing my daily practices, I will react like that. So it's really moving from, so how do I say it? You react less and you're just feeling more and you can reset yourself. So it's sort of like, you react less, you feel these feelings and you reset yourself and you're walking through, not beating yourself up like I did, having a meltdown or not beating yourself up because you had a reaction that hurt someone's feelings or said something that you regretted. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And what it sounds like to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy, is when you're dealing with burnout, when you're dealing with healing and recovery, so much of it is self-awareness, understanding, even in the burnout, what's causing the burnout. You have to be self-reflective of yourself, of what's causing the burnout, what you can handle, what you can't handle. And even when it comes to the healing and recovery, you need to be self-reflective of what is making you feel better, what is giving you peace, what is giving you calmness, correct?
Exactly. So to build on what you said, right? So let's pick an example of someone at work and their boss is putting all their pressure on them and they think it's the boss who just keeps piling more on.
Right.
So the first thing I'll say to a person I'm coaching is, well, have you told your boss that you have a lot on your plate and you need him or her to guide you on priorities? No, I haven't. Well, what's the fear? The fear is if I say that I'm gonna lose my job and I can't afford to lose my job. And I go, well, what's causing that fear? Right? So it's not the old wound that's causing the fear. It's the next belief, right? It's the next fear,
Yes.
right? If I lose my job, then I'm not going to be able to make my mortgage payment. If I can't make my mortgage payment, my son and I are not going to have a place to live. And if my son and I don't have a place to live, where am I going to go? Right? So you have to think about all the narrative we have, right? So in this example, overcoming burnout is really recognizing the noise and quieting the noise and redirecting it. That's why on the cover of my book I say, redirect negative thinking, right? You have to recognize and redirect that negative thinking, which is really driven by all those fear-based thinking. But, in that example, this is not the boss doing this to anyone. This is the person not being able to speak up. So part of the recovery journey for someone is learning to say, like I said before, help me prioritize because you've given me 6 things to do. I want to ensure that I'm delivering for you and I don't want to disappoint you. Right? You just acknowledge, I don't want to disappoint you. You're counting on me.
Right.
Show me how I can get this done in the manner. And as you know, so many people, at work and, for example, will pile things on, but they're themselves are not, they're not thinking about, right? They're just not thinking about when it's due. Oh, you don't have to get that till next week. We're good with that. I need this today, right? So it's that kind of stuff. And when we learn to find our voice and have that conversation, we can change things. I think I answered the question. I think I got lost in the tangent
Yes,
there.
absolutely. How does rest help with healing and recovery from burnout?
Yeah, so self-care is so critically important, right? And so what I find for all of us who struggle with this is we don't give ourselves permission. We don't. We do not. So the first step is give yourself permission to take some time for yourself. I have found for me personally, 5 minutes a day is game changing. 5 minutes of quiet. 5 minutes of quiet is what I need. Today, I need 15 minutes because I have a lot more going on in my life, right? So, but rest is essentially something that is different for everyone. 5 to 15 minutes of quiet a day quiets your mind and gives you that reset that you need to walk into your day without, I have to this, I have to that, I have this, I have that. And then you're arguing with your spouse or your coworker in your head and you're all worked up already, right? So that 15 minutes of quiet is good. But how do you find the time to rest? You make the time. You make the time. And I've worked with different women, and some women they give themselves a bedtime, right? Other women will give themselves an hour to take for lunch, right? And leave the office, right? And just go do what they need to do, right? So it's different for everyone. And when I work with different people, it's finding what works. Me personally, rest for me, it sounds crazy, but it's action. Like I need to go for a walk. And I can tell you when I don't go for a walk and I'm not breathing the air and I'm not feeling the sun. Some cases I like to walk in the rain too, and I'm not hearing the rain. That's not rest for me. I get more stressed, right? So I think for each of us, we all have our own things that help us rest, reset, and restore, if that makes sense.
I know for me, Tracy, I work out. And, I know people work out, to be healthy, strong heart, and live longer, all those things. But I work out because the majority of the time, that's the only thing that I do just for me. And when you were talking about, that you walk and sometimes you walk in the rain, when I exercise, that's really the only time that I'm doing something just like no one else gets the benefit from it except for me.
Exactly.
So if you can find something, whether that's working out or knitting or painting or reading, whatever that looks like and feels for you, that only you receive the benefit from it, that can constitute your rest as well.
Exactly. And it varies by person. So there's no one right way. It's just knowing, I remember my friend back when I was burned out and I was like, I don't have time. I don't have time. And I wouldn't give myself permission. And you know what she asked me? She said, what do you like? Right? Because I was so disconnected from myself. And I said, well, I like candles. She said, okay, I want you to sit down right now and light a candle. I sat down and I lit the candle and I took a deep breath and I was like, wow, I just rested. Right. And I reset. So yesterday yesterday was a busy day for me. And I was feeling a little overwhelmed. So I have tons of candles now. I put all these tea lights around my living room and I said, I'm not going to work in my office. I'm going to sit in my living room where the lighting is great, especially when the candle ambiance is there. And I lit all these candles and about an hour later, I felt good, and that was the me stuff. And I wasn't working. I just wanted to sit in there, and then I decided, yeah, I can later on. I was like, I could do a couple of emails because I felt better. So I think it's finding the time. I find some women, it's quiet time in the car after they drop the kids off at school, right? It's quiet time plus some relaxing music. Some people, music is their anchor, so they'll just put music on while they're sitting at work, right? And they'll just have some calm music playing for themselves on their headset. I mean, there's so many different strategies, but each of us have to get honest with ourselves and what it is and give ourselves permission to do it.
How do women, and of course we're focusing on women today, but men as well, how can women set boundaries without the guilt that comes with that sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, again, that goes back to our beliefs. So I'm going to keep bringing it back to that, because the guilt is really what? It's coming from something old, right? So, the idea here is boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are not like, no, I'm never talking to you again, or I'm not doing this. It's not just I'm putting my foot down and stamping my foot down. It's
Mhm.
learning how to have that two-way dialogue, like I shared
Yes.
before, right? So for the boss who's piling 7 things on your plate, it's saying, I don't want to let you down. And you've given me 7 things to do, and I don't know what to do first, right? That's the boundary right there. I don't know what to do first.
Yes.
Tell me what to do first, right? Show me. And I find when you're asking for guidance, people, I don't know a single manager. I mean, I led a business for over 20 years. As soon as someone asked me to prioritize, I was like, oh, and I looked at what I put on their plate. It was me who failed to say, I need this by Thursday. I need this tomorrow by noon. I need this today by end of day. It was their own internal pressure. Oh my God, she needs all of this today from me. Do you see what I mean?
Mhm.
So how do they set boundaries without guilt? First, recognize what's driving the guilt, but more importantly, learn how to have that conversation. Feel comfortable with enough with yourself to have that conversation. When you can acknowledge your boss and acknowledge, not badly, you have done this, right? No, it's more, acknowledge, I want to serve you. Like, I don't want to let you down.
Right.
You've given me all of this. And I just need help prioritizing how I'm going to get it done for you, because I really want to perform here. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And like I said, that one woman I worked with who did that with me, I was like, that was eye-opening, right? I was like, wow, like she just did that. I admired her so much. And I realized where my failings were in communicating as a leader, and not to say failure, but
Right. Absolutely.
communicate clearly, you know?
Yes. Let's talk about workplace and what can be done there. What can leaders and executive directors do to prevent burnout within their workplace, within their employees?
Well, I think that's a tricky question. Having
Mhm.
been an employer, right? Here's one of the things I've learned. If my internalized beliefs, my old beliefs are shaping my thinking, my feelings, and my actions, let's say,
Yes.
and how I show up. As an employer, I don't know your beliefs, your thoughts, your feelings, and what's driving,
Right.
right? I
Right.
don't. And I know for myself as a leader, as a very insecure leader at that, when I first started, you know, someone's feelings of insecurity would trigger mine, right?
Mhm.
So someone would say, people would say, oh, you're, I'm trying to think of some of the examples, you're tough, right? They would say, you're tough. And, you don't know what goes into everything. And you're so unrealistic. And I'd have people really melting down with me. I'd feel like a failure as a manager, right? So, and then what would happen to me? I'd react and feel like, and for me, my thing is I avoid you after that. That's how the issue is self-avoidance. I would
Mhm.
avoid you and I wouldn't want to deal with you anymore. That wasn't productive. Okay, so what can employers do? Well, when we start to learn, and this is what I say to anyone, when you understand how your life experiences have shaped your thinking and how you show up, you are now a resilience champion, right? Because you can recognize we all have this. We all do. Not all of us take it to burnout, right?
Mhm.
We all have storms, okay? And for many of us, we respond to our boss's storm, for example, or our boss might be responding to our storm, okay? So what can we do in the workplace? Well, what I typically will say is seek to understand first, right? Know yourself, right? So that you can then acknowledge and have a conversation in a way that's productive, rather than walking out and saying, she's such a ... and she doesn't understand anything. And I'm going to go gossip and tell everyone how unsupportive my boss is. So for those of us who feel unsupported, we're the ones, right, who are not setting the boundary
Mhm.
of basically what we need, right? We're not asking for guidance on how to do it. We just sit in a meeting and we nod, and we're frustrated in our mind. They're adding more to my plate. They don't get it.
Right.
And we come out and we're negative, and we as the negative ones gossiping are creating the toxic work environment, not the
Yes,
boss.
absolutely.
Okay. not the boss. Now, on the boss's side of it, on a leadership side, I know many leaders, and I've having been the role I was in, I've actually mentored many women in the professional space
Mm-hmm.
using the tools that I've learned. And oftentimes it's our own beliefs, right? So, so as I said, what did I do? I was two things. I was either self-reliant, forget it, I'll do it myself. And how does that affect people when I say forget it, I'll do it myself?
Right.
It means I don't trust you.
Exactly. And then it creates insecurity in you.
Correct. Right. So that's how my actions as a leader affect you. So once I understood my self-reliance and what it did, I learned how to delegate. I learned how to thank people. Right. I learned how to slow down and communicate what I needed as a leader. And when people didn't understand, it wasn't that it was them that didn't understand me. I wasn't being clear, and it's being accountable to me. Right. So that was one big one. Self-avoidance. Avoidance was a big one. I was so uncomfortable when I first became a leader. I didn't know how, I was like, I don't know how to lead. And I had all this self-doubt, all this insecurity, all this lack of esteem. So my best thing was, I'm going to avoid. I'm going to just send you an email and go figure it out. And then when things would go to, would blow up, I'd say, well, see, they didn't get it. And it was a blame game, right?
Yes.
So that's not an effective leader, right? So I had to get real with that, right? And say, no, I'm going to show up. I'm going to be present. I'm removing avoidance, and I'm going to show up, and I'm understanding the project management language, for example. And I'm going to learn that language, and I'm going to ask questions. And, and I showed up, and that's what I did, right? And then I made it a point to learn it. So I really think the onus is on us individually. I think change happens within. And when we change and we learn how to recognize and we learn how to navigate and change things, the ripple effect is incredible, right? But not everyone does. So when we can recognize it in someone, we just don't have to engage in it. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. How can we redefine success, Tracy, beyond productivity? Because so many people feel like they're only successful when they've reached these tangible milestones.
That is such a great question, because I think so many of us define everything on achievement. We
Yes.
don't base it on fulfillment. So to me, it's basing it on fulfillment. I built a business and I loved what I did. And then I always said to myself, the day that I don't love it is the day I need to leave. And that's what I did, right? I had worked through my burnout, and I knew I was no longer fulfilled. It wasn't filling my soul anymore. And it wasn't giving me, that sense of joy, and that sense of, contribution, right? Because I think all of us want to belong, and we want to contribute, we want to give, and we want to be recognized for that, right? And some of us are around, we're surrounded by people who don't know how to recognize. But when we learn our own stuff and we can recognize our own achievements, right? And we're still getting that joy and fulfillment from it, then we're good, right? So, and I think achievement is on a number of levels. Not reacting to the kids, right? And
Right.
not reacting to our spouse, or, being able to navigate me time with our significant others, right? Because
Yes.
oftentimes, we think, oh, now they want this from me, you know? And so, it's just really, finding the time to, navigate each of the relationships in our lives and showing up in a way that's fulfilling for us. So sometimes it's having a date night, right? I learned that from my executive admin. She was married for 50 years, and we had an event once, and someone said, "How did you stay married for so long?" Because she came to work with us when she retired, and she said, "We still have a date night."
Wow.
She realized, having children, she led, she was working at an insurance company in her day, and she was leading, bringing women into the workplace. Her name is Janet Hanna, and she was a pioneer for women back in the 1960s and 70s. And so what she realized then was the only way to keep what she had was to make the time to be present. And so, there's so much we can learn from our elders, and that was one that she taught me.
What does soft living mean and what does that look like?
What do you mean by soft living?
Just not taking on so much,
Hmm.
deciding what you're going to take on, what you're not going to take on.
My friend Candace used to talk to me especially when I was a business leader.
Mhm.
I felt like I had to be everything for everyone, and I took everything on. And she had recovered from burnout too. And what she said is know your limits. And
Mm,
so I live by
yes.
that today. This was many, many years ago. And knowing your limits is so critically important. So for example, so many people, they want me to help them, or they want me to, mentor them and things like that. And sometimes I have to say, my limit right now, I'm at capacity. It's my limit. I want to do this for you. I want
Right.
to help. I don't have the capacity right now, but that doesn't mean I don't care. Right.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Right. It means I know my limits today, and I know what I can do and what I'm not able to do. So I think soft living, to answer your question, is knowing your limits and knowing what you can
Yes.
and can't do. And not being afraid, because again, when we've recognized the impact of our early lives on our unconscious minds, and then of course how they shape us and all that we do,
Hmm.
we can navigate that conversation not only internally, but then we can have it as a very productive conversation with the outside folks in our world.
Can you give us some ways, maybe some daily practices, some weekly practices of how women can reconnect with joy, reconnect with creativity after burnout?
Yeah, so in my own journey, I had to learn how to manifest change. So once I understood my issues, um,
Mm-hmm.
I would do things like I'm removing self-reliance, and I'm replacing it with the ability to ask for help. And then I would affirm I'm asking for help, right? So I would celebrate my daily joys, right? And so to me, to reconnect with yourself is to start that practice, right? So that at the end of the day, you look at your day. How did I do? I asked
Okay.
for help. I asked for help 3 times. Yay, right? And I got it.
Yes.
And we're celebrating our wins. Okay. All
So
right.
important.
Right. And then we might have had a mess up, but what do? We always have setbacks. We stay focused on the self-criticism, So it's really about looking at our wins on the one hand,
Mm-hmm.
celebrate our wins. And then when we find that we've had a setback, just go through the mental exercise. What happened? What happened? What happened was I reacted. Well, what was that? What was triggered for me?
Mm-hmm.
I was afraid of, not being good enough, right? I was afraid of being less than that person. I was comparing myself, right? And then where did I go from there? Oh, I gossiped, right? And I started getting negative about them and tearing them down. What can I do different? Well, tomorrow, so I'm going to remove essentially my negative trait, which is I'm removing gossip and I'm replacing it with praise. So I'm going to go into the office tomorrow, and I'm going to let everyone know that was unfair of me to say, and I'm going to praise what they did well, right? And so that's celebrating another win, right? And that's bringing the joy, because what starts to happen is we magnetize, we attract goodness. Now we're attracting people who are
Yes.
positive. We're not stuck in the stew, right? Because when we stay stuck in the stew, it's negative and it's toxic,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And you attract that. If you stay stuck
Exactly.
in this, yes, you attract
You
that.
do. Please don't stay stuck in the stew. Get out of it. And when you're out of it, the feeling, like all I can say is, having recovered from burnout, and I manage my burnout recovery daily, turning that lemon, which was I wanted to die,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't want to live. That by making the decision, like, no, I got to get over this. I got to stop criticizing myself. I got to stop doing everything for everyone. I got to change. Where did it take me? Well, it opened my heart, right? I have friendships today that, I mean, I cherish. I was so isolated and alone, and I felt like no one loved me and cared. Meanwhile, everyone did. Okay.
Right.
I've repaired relationships. I had a falling out with my aunt and uncle who I love dearly. And my old thinking was, that's it. My boundary was, I'm never talking to them again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? No, I showed up and I repaired that. You know, then I grew up, my mom was mentally ill and my sister's mentally ill, and my brother, sadly, he overdosed from, he had a significant trauma when he was young. He died when he was 29. I felt so alone. I was the perpetual caretaker in my family. And I just kept manifesting I'm loved and I belong. And next thing I know, I discovered my mother had a daughter when I was 3 and she found me. My life is full. Then I discover I was born out of wedlock. I discover my father's children. They welcomed me, right? And I have nieces and nephews who want me to be in their life, right? Because I'm not their caretaker. I'm just Aunt Tracy. And they
Yes.
call me for guidance and mentorship. My
Oh,
life
wow.
is full, right? So what I find is when we stay stuck in the stew,
Mm-hmm.
we're in the negativity and we're not attracting positivity. Now, if I was stuck in the stew and these people came into my life, I don't think they'd want to be in my life, right? But I've attracted that positive, and they'll call me. I'm struggling, and they want to talk things out, and I'm grateful that I could be a big sister today. It's amazing.
Yes, yes. Tracy, what would you tell your younger self? Your younger self sounds like she went through so much.
Hmm.
What would you tell your younger self about burnout and balance?
Yeah, and that's why my program is really geared toward women who are between 35 and 50. Well,
Mm-hmm.
55, but really 35 to 45 to me is that younger self when we're just doer, 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 and we're
Yes.
so afraid to fail. What I would say to them is give yourself permission to learn more about how to manage some of that stuff that's buried deep that is driving you, right? I didn't give myself permission. I just kept pushing and doing
Mm.
more. And more importantly, ask for help, right? Have the conversation. Let other women help you. I let other women help me. And, I think for us as women, I just find there's this belief that we have that we can't trust other women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's societal, and I do. I
I
really
think so too.
I have my own theories on it. I don't want to talk about it, but I do. And I think rather than sizing each other up and comparing ourselves, right? Let's open our hearts to each other and support each other because we're all going through the same thing.
Now, a couple more questions before we say goodbye to you, Tracy. You are a coach, you're a mentor, you are an author as well. What is your intention in this space of teaching women about burnout and how to recover from burnout, but also how to prevent burnout?
Yeah. So my intent is this. I built and led an award-winning multi-million-dollar company, and I'm known in the pharmaceutical industry as being a legend for transforming science into clinical practice. What got me to this book? Well,
Mhm.
4 years ago, and this answers your question because this is one of my greatest achievements. 4 years ago, my sister's mentally ill like my mom, and I didn't appreciate, nor did I fully understand how disabled my sister was. Her 14-year-old daughter was about ready to fail 8th grade, but this is a kid who is wicked smart. I mean, so smart. And she
Mhm.
would always say to me, I want to be like you when I grow up, Aunt Tracy, And when she was almost failing, I said to her, what do you need to succeed in high school? And she said, really? And, well, yeah. And I'm thinking I'm going to get her like a tutor, right?
Yeah.
Well, she reached out to me in a way that to this day still touches me. She said, honestly, I need help with my mother. And she reviewed with me the same thing that she became me, right? She took care of her mother starting at the age of 11. And I uprooted my entire life. When a 14-year-old has the courage to ask for help,
Yes.
she wanted to do well in high school. She wanted to go to college. She wanted to make something of herself. I uprooted my life. I moved from New Jersey to South Carolina. So my spouse stays in New Jersey. I'm coming home every month just to try to keep our life together. My friends, my family, everything is here in New Jersey. And I moved to South Carolina, knew nobody. It was a culture shock. So in that time, I turned lemons into lemonade and I wrote my book. And why did I write my book? Because my burnout came back. Living with my sister, living with my sister was triggering a lot of old stuff that was formed from my early life experiences with my mom.
Yes.
And I was like, what is wrong with me? I was like out of my mind again, I felt. And I was struggling. I was having outbursts again. I was angry. I was back to fine. I'm fine, but I'm really like, So I decided to go deep, and I decided to really ask myself, what helped me? What helped me? And so every conversation I had, every person who's influenced me, every book, and I put together the Aurora Method, because the Aurora Method is a set of 8 practices that transform my life. But here I was back in the stew, and I had to get out of it. So I decided to write my story and show people how my life is I had some pretty intense trauma, and some experiences that might not be like others. So I don't want people to compare to my experiences. The intent was to show people how our life experiences shape our thinking. And then I show the tools that help me. And I actually created them into useful, practical tools. And I share the 8 practices that changed my life. And now what I want to do, since I've sold my business, I want to just coach women to help them see that it's all within us. It's not them doing anything to us. It's us that's doing it to us. And we can change it, and we can empower ourselves to be better. And I don't mean better because we're bad, but better at showing up, and better at being present, better at saying no, because it's a complete sentence, and better at finding ourselves and taking care of ourselves in a way that no one else can.
Do you think, Tracy, that if you had not uprooted your life, left New Jersey, moved to South Carolina to take care of your sister so your niece could graduate from high school, do you think you would have come up with the Aurora Method?
I've been practicing the Aurora Method as practices. So,
Okay.
but formalizing it into, I had to, like I said, the turnaround is a tool in the book. It was conversations with my friend, right? And I had to really go deep with what helped me see these patterns. So I
Yes.
created some tools. Then I created another tool that's called the Life Storm Navigator, to help people see their own traits and to think and do the opposite, so that it's right in front of them, right? These are, again, conversations with other people in my life. And then I created something called the connection builder, right? Like how do we mend and show up and acknowledge, right? So it's how do we mend relationships that we want back in our lives, and then how do we continue to practice acknowledgement so that we keep doing esteemable things and we keep feeling good about ourselves. So to answer your question, do I think I would have done it? I can't answer that honestly. Yes, because I was in a great place. I was so happy with my life. I mean, I had so much abundance in my life. But when I went back to the desert, that's what it felt like. When I went back to the desert of isolation, I wanted to get out. And I didn't want to get out in a negative way, right? I was like, no, I've learned so much. No.
Yes.
So I made the decision that I want to serve. And that's really, so it took me full circle. My
It
career
really did.
My career
Yes, it
started
really
one
did.
harder, and now I'm back doing it in a different way.
And did your niece finish high school?
She graduated and she got a presidential scholarship, and she's at Drew University here in Madison, New Jersey. And I am just beyond proud, and she's just flourishing. It is so amazing.
Well, it was worth it then to uproot your life.
I call it my greatest achievement.
Yes.
I gave her the environment that helped
You
her.
needed.
Right. I did it.
Yeah. You gave her what you needed when you were her age.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then I had to go back to my 37-year-old self who burned out,
Yes.
and say, what do you need now? And writing that book was cathartic. It gave me the ability to re-feel some of the old things and let them go. It gave me deeper understanding. And then it helped me pull from the depths of my soul to give others what was it was like freely given to me by the people in my life. I mean, and there are so many influences in my life that it gave me the ability to just give it. And so, I'm just starting this coaching business. I've been professionally mentoring for, over 20 years. And the last 10 really taking the Aurora Method and teaching it, but again, talking people through it, right? And showing them how to do it, but not with these formal tools that I created. So I'm just so excited to share it with the world.
Yes. And I'm so excited that you shared some bits of it with my community and on this podcast. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Well, thank you
Now, my
for
final question for you, who do you think would make a great guest on the podcast? But you have to help me get them on.
well, I think it would be Miriam Simon. So Miriam is, I met Miriam at a conference, and she wrote a book called Tattoos and Pearls. And
Mhm.
what it's about is similar to my own experience. And so when I met her, she's like a soul sister. For her, the tattoos are like the things that are inked sort of in your being, right? And then the pearls of wisdom that you get based on your experiences. But she's an executive. She sits in a corner office, and her journey. She's actually an immigrant,
Mhm.
and her journey, becoming an American citizen and going through some of the stigma that she had to deal with, and the neighborhood that she lived in, and the fear that she had, and breaking through all of it, and becoming the executive leader that she is today. And she mentors and builds leaders in her career. I would absolutely encourage you to bring Miriam on the show.
Thank you so much for that recommendation. I cannot wait to learn from her as well. And again, thank you so much, Tracy. Like I said at the beginning of our conversation, I had really, really been looking forward to this podcast, and you did not disappoint at
Oh,
all.
thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, Crystal.
And thank you to my community. You can get Tracy's podcast and all of my other podcasts on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.